Why do you want to go to Mars so much? And do you believe that the next war could happen in space because that's where the satellites are?
Well, I'm the creator of Space Force. This was before I knew Elon, but I thought it was very important. It turned out to be very important. We were getting killed by Russia and by China, and now we're leading, really leading big in space. And I think from a defensive standpoint, that's true. No, there's a lot of interest in going to Mars. It is something that would be, it would be a great achievement. It would be a great thing if we could do it.
That's President Trump joining me on Sunday Morning Futures back in March on why innovating America's space technology is so critical. A report from the World Economic Forum and McKinsey expects the global space economy to reach nearly $2 trillion by 2035. Joining me now is the CEO and founder of Aurelia Institute, Ariel Ekblaw. Ariel, thanks very much for being here today. I've been doing a lot of work on the space segment because of national security issues. And I think President Trump looks at most issues through a national security lens. And I want to get your take on what you're doing at Ariel in terms of your research. What are you prioritizing right now with regard to space?
Good morning, Maria. Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here to talk to you about national security in space, the future of the space economy. What we do at Aurelia Institute, spun out of my lab at MIT, is we're focusing on space infrastructure for the public good. So we're looking at ways that we can self-assemble new structures in orbit. Think space Legos that actually build structures way bigger than your biggest rocket payload fairing. And that's because it's time to scale up what we can actually achieve in space. These would be examples for biotech. There's amazing novel types of biological structures that we can only fabricate when we're floating in microgravity. And then also think about national security, being able to maintain America's predominance in orbit after the International Space Station is decommissioned in 2030, 2031.
Yeah, I mean, and when looking at space, you also have to understand what technology is being used on the ground. On Earth, and how that impacts what will happen in space. We spoke recently with the founder of Anduril Industries, Palmer Luckey, and he is also worried about protecting space as a national security asset. Watch this.
Space is still the final frontier. You're right. It is where a lot of the battles of the future are going to start. Whether you're talking about destroying assets in space or degrading their capability to perform, there's so many elements of our military that are critically dependent on space. We need to control the shipping lanes between here and the moon, here in the asteroid belt. We need to protect freedom of navigation in space, freedom of communication in space, more or less doing exactly what the United States Navy does on Earth, but in a growing space economy. That's where we need to be looking forward to.
So, Ariel, tell us about the technology that you're seeing out there in terms of doing just that, in terms of creating the growth story of space on Earth, but with an eye towards space to understand the national security implications.
Absolutely. So I think we're at an era, an inflection point in the space industry. The cost to get to space has dropped dramatically from about $50,000 a kilogram in the NASA shuttle era to now with Starship coming online, it's anticipated to be below $200 a kilogram. That's like FedEx. If you can ship something around the world, you can ship it to space. And what that's enabling is companies like Turion. So we have an investment firm where we invest in next stage, next generation space technologies. Turion Space is looking at space domain situational awareness, so akin to what Palmer Luckey is referring to. And then we also are thinking about companies like Interloon, where they would be mining helium-3 on the moon. It's really critical, as we now know, the competition with China for rare earth materials, to be able to go and find American sources of helium-3 to be able to power our fusion industries and quantum in the future. So I'd say keep an eye on companies like Interloon.
How significant is the China threat from your standpoint?
So we talk about this a lot in the space industry. My parents are both Air Force pilots. So my dad was an A-10 fighter pilot. My mom was one of the first women to ever fly for the United States Air Force. And we take this really seriously, both in our family and in the industry. And more broadly, it's often discussed as a Cold War, an active Cold War with China within our industry. And I think it's important to begin to imagine what that next era of competition, potentially collaboration, might look like. We did have moments, even in the Cold War with the Soviets, where there was points of collaboration between the two countries, but that was few and far between, and we need to be thinking strategically about what the Chinese capabilities will be and how we're competing on an American side with our new standards of innovation.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I don't know that there's an interest on the China side to cooperate. I mean, this is a space race. And you know, depending on which superpower is able to dominate space will perhaps dictate who is dominant in a potential conflict. We spoke with Kevin Zinger yesterday, the founder of Divergent. He actually brought on set one of his cruise missiles, which was made by 3D technology in under an hour. But he, too, talked about the opportunity and the threat from China as it relates to space. Watch this. There's also a threat in space. I mean, you know, someone said to me recently, look, the next war will likely start or be partly in space because that's where our satellites are. They want to take the adversary will try to take down our satellites and then lights out in America, right?
Yes. So this technology, which is really fully digital engineering and manufacturing, supercharges all of these programs because it allows you to develop not only software at a very high speed, but hardware almost as fast, or in some cases faster than the software. So imagine that development cycle is much more rapid. The production cycle is much more rapid. There's much greater innovation. What we need to do is now take this technology and embed it in all of those programs and supercharge it. So understand this technology, embed it, scale it, do it faster than the Chinese do it, and that's what President Trump does best, which is act and disrupt.
Yeah, for sure. Ariel, real quick before you go, a lot of conversation now about space. Do you see more investor dollars going toward this sector?
Yes. So we see from Morgan Stanley, from Bank of America, from Goldman, these estimates that it'll be over $1 trillion space economy by the 2030s. We see incredible deal flow now for our VC fund looking at the future of space innovation. And I actually think those points about China is why it's so important for the United States to invest in space station infrastructure for the coming decades. And we're excited to be working on that.
And that's why President Trump created the first U.S. Space Force. With right now General Whiting in charge, the commander of Space Force. Ariel, it's great to get your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ariel Ekblaw joining us. Quick